Good morning again. Welcome to yet another session of the Ullapool Book Festival. This session is sponsored by Polbain Bard and After the Day. And this is a real special one for me. And the Polbain Bard, about whom you will be hearing a great deal in the next hour or so. I would like to introduce you to the folk lined up on the stage here. There's a line from a P.G. Woodhouse novel when Bertie Wooster goes to Deverell Hall and he's shown in late to dinner. And he says that I seem to be looking out on a sea of ants. Well, I seem to be looking out on a sea of MacLeods. There's three in a row. There's another one who's Neil MacLeod of Polbain Bard, who's not visible, but he is very much here as well. On my far right is Roderick Macleod. He was born and raised in Polbain in a Gaelic-speaking household between the wars. And after doing his national service in the Royal Navy, he studied Celtic and English at Aberdeen University. And then he taught English for many years in and around Dundee and Angus, and also the head teacher. And that professional career as a teacher lasted for 40 odd years. And Roddy and his wife Eileen, I'm very proud to say, are good friends of Marianne and mine, and good neighbours just up the road in Ochterhouse. In the middle, Roddy's son Kevin grew up in Ochterhouse, was educated in Dundee, and also studied at Aberdeen University, studied geography. He works for the Royal Commission on Ancient and Historic Monuments. But he's better known as a member of the Occasionals Gaelic band, where he's the banjo player. I'm not going to make any rude jokes about banjo players. But he's also an incredibly versatile and proficient musician of many other stringed instruments, and he's made several CDs of his own music, all of which, or several of which, are for sale outside. We're going to depart from the usual tradition of the book festival today by having items for sale outside afterwards. CDs of the music that you're about to hear, and also a booklet as well. And here next to me is Ali Beag MacLeod, who I'm sure needs not a lot of introduction to many of you from these parts. A well-kept character, again a very fine traditional musician, who has made the playing of the accordion in distinctive West Highland style his speciality, and also a native Gaelic speaker from Coigach. And three of them between them are going to tell us about the Polbain Bard. And this has been a study of Roddy's for many, many years. And I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm going to leave it to him, to Kevin, and to Ali Beag to fill in the details. But the product of Roddy's research is this booklet, the Trowel in my hand, and this is a new edition of it, and I'll just read something that I gave to Kevin to put on the back of this new edition because I think it's important. The modest size of this publication belies its importance as an act of preservation and celebration of carrying tradition into the future. Not only are Neil MacLeod's poems and songs excellent in their own right, but they also, together with Roderick Macleod's richly informative commentary, give us a vivid history of the community in which both of them were raised. I think this is going to be a fabulous session, and I'd like you to put your hand together and welcome all three of these.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you here. James did indicate that there might be two men and a sheepdog here, but the lambing's on just now, so they may not have turned up. So it's really a pleasure to see so many of you. We'd like to really start, right, and this was actually James's suggestion. I made a very small film which we're going to show you. It's only about 2 minutes long, and it's to really give you a kind of flavour of Coigach, but also the sentiments of one of the Bard's strongest poems. And take it away.
Oren Patton Harapert. Mowallach in a factorin, de Sinatunya Moor. Hoekie uit en Hallewoon, ha ach voor ees voor joon. Geneig kun you ach gemeraan de koene glas na gorn, jen jaren weg narichen, gaan neischen lieter broik. Siet rein in jekerorn, gach bein is strach haar woon, goed die heet gus a chlotta schein, gus roontjen tu ha goon. Weer aan se parlement a takker kor an tooi, a geri en jaren ashe green, gai horsle furnart woon. Simek den je tapi, zijn goed fjern hort woop, beken valaf ag Afrika, sg Amerika haar goon, op wallach in a factoren, rein pianten rein gekroei, a fast die week rein furach rein, is skirren tu ha goon. Siet a hami rockrach, gach duurkes eer lawaun, goed die heet gach treinloch, jenek eeg den goed laun. Sna kache weit klutjach, am kokke gwischen reink, goed Waterloos kurana, moeiach vona suin. Simek tjolach bjastach, biecher, gai goed faas, trusel, trokrach, kastenach, laan jich agus spai. Gaan nekin ju, ach keurig, a melich en daad, is kieper eerkel stukach, le koe ik a haal. Sjouldert baden harapert, ga essen nach uw baan. Va urik in ik krochtjeren, de tachen schesker pla. Varum feik en kuikrach uiach, is truk en poche haal. Gaan dech kun ju, ach locher, kloonjev a faas.
So I'll hand you over to my father now, who will start the results.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure actually to see so many of you here this forenoon. I must make one point clear, and that is that I must stress the fact that I am not a poet, I'm not the poet. This is the work of another poet, a Polbain poet. And as James said, I was born and brought up in my father's crop in Polbain, and of course latterly after my father died at the post office in Ullapool. And that goes right back a long time to the 30s and the 40s. In which point, of course, I was in contact with the older previous generation that was indigenous to the place. The population was quite elderly. Many of them were survivors of the First Great War, the First World War. They were Gaelic speakers. Gaelic was the language of everyday affairs. In fact, they were uncomfortable in English. They were, it was a foreign language to them because the first language was Gaelic, as was my own, of course. And some of them had no English at all. In fact, we had quite a lot of fun with some of the older generation who didn't have any English. They made their own entertainment, and I kept hearing in rather respectful tones of this man that was called locally by the name the Bard, who was held in high esteem by the locals and was a source of great entertainment. He was Neil MacLeod. He was born in 1855, died in 1922, so he spanned the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. He was a bachelor brother of Roderick Macleod, who was a well-known builder in Polbain. He built places all over Scotland, distilleries, churches and whatnot. He was the brother of Neil MacLeod. And some of you may remember, any locals remember Donald Mason MacLeod, who died in the 60s. He was the nephew of Neil. And Neil, as I said, he was unmarried, and he worked with his brother on the building sites that they were on. And Neil also fished lobsters, and he fished lobsters with Roderick Macleod, a local, rather eccentric figure who lived in the village, in the middle of the village. Now, verses of Neil's poetry kept coming up in the Cayley houses by the fireside, although no one seemed to know the whole poems right through. Most people locally in Polbain in the 30s and 40s, they could recite verses of his poems, but there seemed to be no one who actually knew all the poems. It wasn't until I was a student that I got two poems in the printed form from Agnes Ross, who lived next door to us in Polbain. And she gave me a printed sheet containing only two of these poems. There was no indication as to who had actually published them originally. This set me thinking, and over the years I managed to collect some more poems and some fragments from various sources. I'm convinced that he wrote a lot more than I've actually got. But unfortunately, they disappeared with the generation that he came from. That generation, those who had them, they died off unrecorded. And this was the problem at that particular time, in the 50s particularly, and in the 40s. Well, sorry, in the 30s and 40s, the problem was getting this stuff recorded, whereas it was into the 50s before the School of Scottish Studies, Kevin Macleod and co. started recording these. And we're talking here about fragments of poetry predating the activities of the School of Scottish Studies. Now, why did I decide to do this? Why did I decide to collect them? Well, first of all, I was becoming aware that there was, in the 1980s and the 1990s, a growing interest in the cultural life of Coigach, in the history of Coigach, and indeed there came into being at that time a Coigach heritage group. I had asked around if anyone knew about the Bard, and few had ever heard of him, so that was something that had to be rectified. This was a local man, and as such should be honoured by, in one way or another. He was too important just to let slip into history. Secondly, of course, I thoroughly enjoyed the poems myself, and felt that they conveyed a picture of the way of life in Polbain at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries. Poetry is part of the documentation, the social history of any society, any culture, of the culture of any society. They comprised for me a social document of a long gone way of life, and it's for no other reason than that that they warranted preservation as an insight into the life and times of old Polbain. Last but not least, they give us a taste of Coigach Gaelic, which has gradually died out since the immediate post-war period. Until today, there are very few Gaelic speakers left in Coigach, just a handful, and the majority have not even a working knowledge of it, and many people just don't even seem to think about it at all, think in it or about it. It was remembered too that this was the language that was used on the croft, it was used at the fank, it was used at the dipper, it was used at the peats, it was used on the hill, and it was used in the bar, wherever you went. That was the type of community that you were living in, represented by these places that I just mentioned, the fank, the dipper, and so on. That was the kind of community it was. You may say that it was a peasant community, which is not a derogatory term in the sense that they worked in a self-sufficient way, and were not dependent on an economic environment as we have it nowadays, where you make money to buy stuff to consume and so on. And so at the end of the day, I wanted samples of a sample of Coigach Gaelic to be enshrined in some way or other, and that's why I produced this little book. With rather immense help and encouragement from Kevin, my son, and Ali, my wife, I decided to gather together the material I had. And Kevin undertook the task of having it published in a small booklet, the Trowel in my hand. As for the translation of the poem, now this is important. What you're going to hear is they are not new poems. The translation, as you all know, is a dodgy business. For one thing, you can say one thing in one language, and it can come out very differently in another language. It has been, one person has, Meg Bateman, in fact, has produced a poem from a poem. But I didn't do that because I'm not a poet. So what I did was to translate it verbatim. In other words, word for word, retaining as far as possible the original idiom, the original nuances. This is the difficulty. I mean, two words can be, you can have, look up a dictionary for a Gaelic word and you get an English word. But you try using them and you find that you're in hot water, it doesn't work. So I do a pure straightforward verbatim. Now, enough of that. The poem that you saw on the screen, that is hold on till I find it.
Which incidentally was spoken by my father, just in case you didn't realise that.
Yes, that's right. Now, this poem, there were several attempts to clear the people of Coigach, and they were at the far end, up the Coigach end. And when the boats arrived, you probably know the story, when the boats arrived carrying the warrants, the women dressed as men, the men dressed as women, and drove them back into the sea, and they never managed to clear them. But there was a group of houses, I think there's 12 houses, opposite Tarbert Lodge, where they were actually cleared. And one of the families cleared was my great-grandfather's family. And my grandfather was a babe in arms at the time. And that whole village, it's now, as the bard says, it's now desert. They were cleared to Canada. And lived off the seashore in the most frugal way. Eventually they were given lots of land in Polbain. Lot, I mean the auctioneer's lot. So if you ever go to Polbain, you won't find them talking about, or the old folk, you won't find them talking about crofts. They call them lots. And so lot 204 is croft 204. It's just one of these quirks of the crofting situation. In it, the bard writes in a fairly strong vitriolic way about the clearances from Trowel to the island of Canada. I won't go through it again because you've seen it on the board. You've seen it on the picture. The second poem I'm going to look at is the Barduanya. Now, I'll keep this as short as I can, but the Green Boat is a light-hearted, amusing poem written as a song. It's the only one that was written as a song because it's got a chorus. It was written as a song about an Auchendu boat owned by the MacLeod family, who were the grandfather and granduncles of Shona Wilson in the Polbain Bard and her sister Girvan.
Who sponsored this event, and they do great seafood.
I'm glad you said that because we enjoyed that.
So should you all.
They were previously they had owned a very big reaper type fishing boat called Fife called the Ivanhoe, and they sold them in 1914. And if you go into Polbain Bard, which we would all recommend, sorry for the publicity stuff. If you go into on the back wall, you'll see a photo of the men that are mentioned in this poem. They're brothers and cousins. The Green Boat then was an inshore fishing boat and was reputed to be very fast. So much so that the skipper, Ali Beag MacLeod, was considering entering her for the America's Cup. Completely scorning, in fact, a suggestion from his brother Murdoch that he should have a go at the local boats. And of course, he says, no, to hang with the local boats, I'm going to have a go at the America's Cup. That Shamrock, handy, by the way, as a great essay on the vital spark, witnessing racing in the crime, and the Shamrock is one of them. And poor old Lipton, for years he tried to win the America's Cup. And one of the points about this poem is the local knowledge that they see, the deep local knowledge that the bard had about the America's Cup. This is very interesting about it. There's another point about the poem, which he seemed to have knowledge of traditional poetic classical ways, methods of describing things, particularly boats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read one verse, the chorus in the first verse. I'll read that, and then I'll read the translation that I did of some of the verses, not all of them. The chorus goes like this. Hami gras bini gra, hami gra wichin nata, kumila one ilgosi marvil kuirasta. That's the chorus. I do say and I shall say, I have said long ago, the green boat is speedy like a grey under full tilt. That is That's a translation of the chorus. Now I'll read just a few verses then from where Ali Murder suggests to Ali that we have a go there at his cup. And here it goes. This is a well-found boat. She'll do well in the sea there. She will win through the rollers just as smoothly as a swan. Aboard her there is a skillful crew, manly, gallant, knowing, cunning. We know not that we troubled her in whatever place she went. There's not one in old Dorney now. I'm not ashamed to say so. Need bother racing after her, her sails being trimmed my way. Thereupon said Murdermore, Ali friend, don't spare her. Have a go at the bosom moor, the fiddler's boat and the scupper. I care not for the bosom moor, the fiddler's boat and the scupper. They'll not show in my way, as like a dog as she speeds away. I am a skillful skipper, steering good course, sails hard to the wind, finally shaking up aloft. Many a step I ever took between Shetland and Kintail, Aberdeen and the Broch, once as swift as never saw. She is bonny as she threads, tightly seamed, long in deck, neatly planked, cleanly nailed, well decked, seated, ruddered, masted. Now on our way to America to take on the Yankee, to relieve her of the cup which the Shamrock failed to win. The Columbia is past, she was gaining on the Shamrock. She did 18 miles an hour, you never hope to catch her. That will be the day when Ali prevails. Fireworks will go up in Ullapool, Sutton and Ireland. That's the green gold. Fiona Mackenzie, when she won the World Gold Medal, sang it on one of her tapes, the Holland and Rosa. That's right.
I'd just like to, at this point, say a few words about the mechanism behind this that I decided to do to help Father with all the modern technology that we have to our advantage. I made sure that everything was actually put into the computer in Word form. I also ensured that Father had actually put the translation in Gaelic, and we assiduously put the grabs on all the correct places, and created an archive that was actually firm, given the fragility of the nature of the material and its genesis. The other thing I was very keen to do was to get my father to actually speak the poems, because we as English speakers look at Gaelic, and if you don't know anything about it, you have not a clue, you have no guide. And the sound of the language and the visual element look very different. So it's very important to get the actual Gaelic, but also the Coigach Gaelic, which Father has. But the last thing that we did, was to take a recording that had been done in the 1950s by Father and our relative Will MacLeod, who's a distinguished artist in Scotland. You probably know of his work. And Will had he got a tape recorder, and they went to their old family home in 203 in Polbain, and did a very poignant and very powerful recording of their old folk singing songs. And we've got a wee extract of Johnny Ali Mackenzie, Johnny Ali and Ulla, singing the Batalanya, and I thought it was really good to hear this. So,
I
So that will give you an idea of what it must have sounded like certainly in the 1950s in Coigach, but I think you're listening back to probably about 1840 there. It's a marvellous sound, that. Now, you're probably wondering why Ali Beag and I are here. We're sitting up here not doing a great deal, but a couple of years ago, Ali and I decided to do a recording together, which is called The Braes of Baden Tarbert. Now, it was an attempt to get a good recording of Ali Beag here, who's a wonderful traditional musician, and I'm very pleased to say we managed to do so. And we actually did it up in the house in Coigach, which was it was great fun this time last year. But we thought was that perhaps a whole load of melodeon and tenor guitar would be a bit sort of tedious for everybody. So we decided to ask Sandy Boots, who's here today, if he would compose one of his fine songs or poems to go on it, which he did. And quite spontaneously, Ali announced that he'd actually written the Gaelic poem as well, commemorating the clearance of Baden Tarbert. So that was an amazing find. And Ali gave it, and it's on here. But the three other poems on here are one you've heard, and two others that are recordings that were done when we did the archive recording. And I decided to ask my colleague, Polbain Bard, from the Occasionals to play some piano under the piece which you heard. Luke Plum from Nifty, he did all the technical work for us, and he did a beautiful guitar piece under Iashkech and Yimi. And the last piece was John MacLeod, who's Will MacLeod's son. He actually composed a piece, a very interesting contemporary piece. He's a rock musician in the Beta Band, and he did a piece for us as well. So that sort of gave a flavour of the music, which we're going to play a little bit of now, and also the poetry as well. So it's a sort of Kaylee in your own kitchen, if you choose. So, but we'll play a track off the first track off the album for you. And it's Ali put all the tunes together. This is Old Joe's Robbie the Sheep Shearer and Brenton Tolan Do. The whole set. The whole set. Yeah? Good. Oh, yeah. I was hoping I knew the tune.
poem is very different, in a very different mood to the previous one. Interesting thing about all the Bard's poems that I've got, they're all different. You can't say that he's writing all his poems in the same vein. They all have different styles, different subjects. It's very interesting intellect and archive. This poem, as I say, is a very different mood altogether. It portrays the harsh realities of lobster fishing in the West in the wild days. Now, this is really going back to the second half of the 19th century. Second half, 19th century, what am I thinking? Now, you've got to remember that these men had to make a living from crofting and fishing. Only few of them had another occupation, and it was probably just keeping the roads tidy. The poem is a graphic description of the life of a fisherman, of a lobster fisherman particularly, the sheer hardship and the dangers that they endured in open boats with only oars and sails, no regard to personal safety. I mean, they just had nothing. It was just the boat, the oars, the sails, the creels, and it was them against the sea. Many fishermen from Coigach were drowned. Drowning was very common occurrences. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that I've heard it said that many of the people who left Tandwa or the people of Tandwa left because of the number of drownings that were there. And so you can imagine what lobster fishing in those days. Remember too that lobsters tended to be right in at the foot of cliffs. And at the foot of these cliffs there were rocks and reefs. And there were huge swells coming in from the Atlantic. So the lobster fisherman's lot was a pretty rough one. Now I'll read you the first verse I think will suffice to give you a flavour of what it was like in the original Gaelic, and then I'll just read you the translation. Sholig manjeri parnigo, gumas en rumoer, u is wash, is gierig, en jeerwand men jou. Geen creatuur is sheetig, wat dreen gaat schroen, na poichen, na nuovas, hap het sucre, goed en gaar. Do you like another verse? Yeah. Door jeski sheen, a klevaken, a schoosjen I toy, a skipper als een dirk, a spani roin jol. Een bullekracht, kapelero, de kacher, tonen de schroen, was je nou eens dat goedendag kunt canvas, ik hoor. That's the sort of tone of the original Gaelic poem, and this is the translation of it. Sailing along with Barney. Barney was his crewman, Roderick Macleod from Polbain. I mentioned him already, and there were great calls. Sailing along with Barney to the foot of Roomore, black and gloomy and grey grew the sky with clouds, and north wind sought to blow, a snarl on every point. The bows were awful, no fun to be too near them. When we had fished our creels and she was squared away, the skipper in the stern and Barney by the sail, Mullagrach I could see not, the spiel rose on high, wherein we were in let her sail away into the breakers of the great sea. She moved ahead so swiftly, a white foam at her stem, spray sweeping over her. I could not see far ahead. Fearful was I that halyard or mast or sail would carry away. When we reached the anchorage and furled away her sail, we were wet and hungry, no spark of fire aboard. It's the lobster fishing that took my courage and my strength away. I'd sooner be a mason with a trowel in my hand. I shall give you some advice if you want to take it from me. Stay over by Mullagrach and shun the northern side. The inner Hlach is most perilous, exposing to the sea, Rúcharn and the Plottichen, each northward cape and point. These placings are run Rumor, the Rumor Coigach, run the northwest corner of it. The anchorage, of course, is O'Donnell Harbour, and Mullagrach is one of the outer, one of the more western islands of the Summer Islands. So that's Iascachini, which I think is probably one of his best poems. The next poem is Bolvuri, and this is a very interesting experiment by the bard, I would say, in that he has a conversation between Barney, who I already mentioned, and the northern point of our list, Bolvuri. It's interesting in that it's a conversation between a human being and an inanimate object. And I don't know how often you've come across this, but there have been other examples. I know one, Will MacLeod game, somebody down in Gale. But it's interesting because it shows the love-hate relationship between Barney, fighting to make a living of the fishing at Bolvuri, and Bolvuri's wrathful sea. It's a very innovative poem, and the bard imagines this conversation between the fisherman and the rocky promontory, the northern point of Islay. It was very good for fishing and was sheltered on the inside, but on the outside it was very stormy indeed. The rollers coming straight in from the ridge. Even on a calm day you can see the sea breaking over it. The conversation between Barney and the Roo reveals this love-hate relationship. Now, I'll try and get through it as quickly as I can, because I think we've got lots of time. There are two bits in it that I think I'll point out to you. First of all, Bolvuri says to Barney, "Bahi me the smoke at you, but do real stasi. I shall drown you with a spittle, so shut your mouth so saucy." And another place he says, "Curumi dynamite at the horn, read the Horpascania," which translates as, "I shall put dynamite up your backside and blow your body apart, blow you to smithereens, blow you to smithereens." This is the way the poem goes then. "You set your net, you idiot, in my armpit in friendship. I was roaring angry. You wouldn't believe me, Barney. You were roaring angry, with heaving and crashing. 'Tis the north that chilled you, as you are by nature, north, south, or southwest. What's that to you, Barney? I shall drown you with a spittle, so shut your mouth so saucy. Indeed, you gave me warning, I cannot that deny. There was no need my net at all to wreck in your fierce rage. To you I give good advice when you perceive my wrath. No need of cruel set near me, or I shall kick them both to death. Though you are roaring angry, you are not a wicked neighbour. You give us fish and lobster, brown crabs and limpets. It serves you well to flatter me, for I have many friends, the black rock of Ullapool and the wreath of Polbain. I shall yet undo you, and get the upper hand. I shall put dynamite up your backside to blow your corpse apart. And the last verse is, you surely will outwit me, says Polbain, but I shall sleep a while. July will be my pillow, my heart, my heave, although you hear not. Sorry, that is his conversation to Polbain, which is quite amusing little poem. The next, and we're coming almost.
So I think at this stage we'll play you one wee tune just to change the accent slightly. And Dad mentioned Will MacLeod, and one thing I'd like to just mention is that in the CD we were very lucky to receive from Will a series of his artworks, which he constructed, painted down at Ballintarget. And he and Father and Ali Beag and Sandy Brooks here, they'd all worked on the bagnet salmon fishing. So there was a theme running through the project of the artwork that Will provided. I actually was very keen that people could see the English and the Gaelic side by side, so you can listen to the poetry, you can read backwards and forwards, you can absorb it, you can even go away and learn it. But the artwork was very special to us, and it was a real treat to have that. So I just wanted to let you know that was there. And we dedicated it to Jim Muir, the whole project, and the recording was dedicated to Jim Muir, who was Father's best friend. So, Ali, we'll play a wee tune called the Hebridean Polka, and another couple of Push the Veil tunes. I think he's off to the FBI. Just to give you a flavor, the second and third tunes are in fact Gaelic Push the Veil tunes, and they would have been the sort of songs that you would have heard sung in the Cayley houses. So, and Ali knows these intimately. So which one is this? The Hebridean Polka. Yeah.
he wrote a romantic poem about a lady whose name we do not know in Armagh. He and his brother were working in Armagh under an Martin, and Neil fell in love with an Armagh lass who ferried him to the island and who bewitched him. The reference to Grace Darling may be a hint at rescue of a drowning man in the bay at Armagh by a local lass whom the press dubbed Grace Darling. And the poet, he calls the girl who rowed him across to Martin, he calls her his Grace Darling. So there is a historical connection there. I'm not going to read it all because it's quite a long poem, but I'll give you just a sample of it. Farewell and best wishes to Ardmere of the Breakers, where I left my fair loved one and me longing for her, where I left my beloved with eyes so lovely and blue, white creamy skin with black cotton grass on the breast of my darling. And he just goes on to say how he's walking home to Appleby through the rock, which they did in those days, and he's looking back to Ardmere, trying to catch a glimpse of his loved one down on the foreshore. And he also admits that he'd been loving her for a long time, but that he's now getting old and grey and doesn't have any hope of ever winning her. And he simply finishes off by saying, "You who roam the country wide, give my greetings to my loved one. Tell her that I am ever enslaved by her love." Now, I'll move on because time is running out, so we'll move on to the remnants. Now, remaining remnants are sketchy, very sketchy. We have some, but I'm sure, as I said already, that he wrote many more poems and songs which are dying with the passing generations. He said he wrote a poem about the local men erecting a great fence on Ben Morasson, and I managed to get Johnny Ali Mackenzie to repeat a verse or two of that poem, but the recording is so poor that I can only decipher snatches of it. But I know that it is quite a numerous poem, and it refers to the local characters who were on the building of this great fence that they built across the top of all places, Ben Morasson. Secondly, there's, I'm going to finish with this, there's a snippet that I got from Betty McCrae, whom I'm delighted to see that she's here with us today. Now, Betty gave me this little snippet some years ago, and it's about Kirsty Ruag, and I'm going to read it to you because it's a neat and rather amusing way of finishing off. Kirsty Ruag and the Minister. Now, Kirsty Ruag was very much into celebrities, but not your modern celebrity with page 3 in the sun or whatever. The celebrity that she fell for was the minister, Mr. MacLeod, and she regarded him as Gabriel himself. I'll just read the English to you because it's quite short. If he, that is, if the minister, if he goes to the hall, she will expect to go to heaven. But Kirsty, poor lass, do not be making worship to MacLeod. He cannot take his wife or mother, nor one of his kin with him to heaven. But if you follow his teaching, you will be singing in glory. But if you are like the wolf, the Mathacali, the Gaelic word Mathacali, if you are like a wolf, abusing and just calling folk, it's to hell you will go, where you will not meet with Mr. Munro. 5 minutes in, just to sum up for you, here we have a man, a poet, what many might call a village bard. But in fact, to my mind, knowing the quality of the Gaelic poetry that he wrote, he was much more than just than a village poet. He was a real poet with an acute power of observation. He had a fine command of the language that he wrote in, and a deep sense of the injustices that were going on around him, like, for example, appearances. He had an impish sense of fun, but he could be and was sharply satiric. He was sharply satiric. Should anyone cross his path, give him occasion to be so, but he had a deep sympathy with those people that were in trouble, with the people who were poor and the people who were clearing the lands. I'll finish off with a story that Betty gave me. Her grandparents lived next door to the barn, and Neil used to come in from work, wet, cold, hungry, coming in from the fishing or coming in from the house building, to borrow a shovel of embers with which to start his fire, because his house was next door. One day, Mrs. MacLeod, that's Betty's granny, Mrs. MacLeod reprimanded him for blowing ash all over the room, to which he replied in Gaelic, "Be you quiet, woman, or else I will write a poem about you." And I think this was the way that he managed to retain more the respect of the local people. But he was also intimidating to the local people. They were quite intimidated by him. And they talked about him in fairly respectful tones, You better not say that, or, the bard will have you. So that's a general overall picture anyway. There are very detailed notes about the bard and about Polbain in those days, about in the book there. And I've only skimmed through it.
And now there's close relations here.
Sorry?
Is Sheila Green not here?
Sheila Green. Is Sheila here? No, there's some of the relatives.
I must point out that Margaret Standing is here. I spotted her, I didn't see her when we came in, but Margaret provided quite a lot of material that our auntie Sandy Fraser and the Moore had collected, and it was extremely helpful in releasing some of the written versions, the only versions that had been written down at that time.
Yes, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to really acknowledge some of my sources, but they are acknowledged in the book. And
everybody's changing the houses and doing everything on a Saturday, so the Coigach people are pretty tied up. But it's great to see you in Campbell here too, so we're very delighted about that. And I think really at this point we should wind it up because Nora, lunch is imminent, and many thanks for coming again. As I say, we'll finish with one final tune. If Ali's still awake, are you there? And Ali unearthed a tune which was written by the great fiddle player Bruce McGregor from Blazing Fiddles, and it's called The Highlander's Revenge, which I think is a very fitting tune. Maybe we're having it. So shall we do that? And the merchandise is outside. My wife's the roadie. And CDs are a tenner and the books are a fiver. And Ali Beag's own tunes and his poems are also in a book which we produced, which is a very nice publication with snippets about his early days as a melodeon player. It's great fun. It's very unique. There's not many left. So thanks very much.